Welcome to Ad Bits. I'm Alex Grossman. We're doing quick chats with people who are shaping the way commercials and culture get made. Today I'm with Alex Pell, co-founder and host of the Bionic Awards and also the technology editor at the Evening Standard. We're going to talk about AI in advertising, what is genuinely changing, what is hype, and what the industry needs to learn fast. Quick note, this episode is supported by 2.0 Films. If you've got any bids, give me a call. We service productions in Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Northern Italy and Austria, fast turnarounds, top-tier crews, and stunning locations. So, Alex, welcome. And before we get into Bionic, from your vantage point, you see tech, media agency, creators all at once. What has changed in the last 6 to 12 months that people outside the bubble still do not get?
Well, that is a really interesting question. So I think we're in one of these periods of time in the technology world where sort of, what's possible is kind of almost running faster than some of the sort of guardrails around it. And I think that's a pattern that we've seen before. We've seen it with social. We saw it with the web itself, obviously, and we've seen it with mobile. So, we're at this point where what you can do is kind of leaping ahead of necessarily, of the sort of maybe the commercial appetite to actually engage. I suppose it boils down to one of the oldest sayings in technology: "Was just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should." And that's a really interesting place to be, because what we can, we're seeing a lot of creators, a lot of agencies being able to do incredible things, and that has increased exponentially in the last 6 to 12 months in terms of the quality that that people are able to achieve. And but when you're working in a commercial environment, especially with big brands, there are reputational issues to consider. There are plenty of legal issues to consider, and so it's just finding that balance between sort of embracing and taking advantage of some of these new technologies without putting at risk the sort of the cultural and the audience cachet that is associated with your brand.
Yeah, it's interesting because I noticed obviously the famous ones recently have been Coca-Cola, and I noticed an ad with McDonald's that went down very badly. It's been interesting to see the pushback on that. So just as interestingly, what has surprised you the most? Has it just been the move? It's been such a quick escalation, as it were, in terms of what's doable, what's viable through the AI apps?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, through the Bionic Awards, we are able to sort of see a lot of the sort of best ads that are being made, but also a lot of the spec ads where people are experimenting with ideas and putting it. And some of the fake or spec ads are actually almost better than so many of the real ones, which is really, incredible.
But they've got more freedom, I'm imagining. So there's no one around trying to change anything.
Yes. I mean, there's definitely more freedom and sometimes a bit more imagination as well. But also, don't forget that what an ad looks like and sounds like is not necessarily what its purpose is. So, sometimes, that there are good reasons around the strategy and the storytelling of an ad that are not necessarily as evident when you look at what the actual output, but it's there to achieve a specific purpose. And some of that sort of strategic and storytelling thinking is not as readily apparent to the casual observer, but it's a critical part of advertising, which is why actually we have a category specifically for that with the Bionic Awards, for storytelling as well as art direction, because it's not just that visual bang for your buck that we're talking about. It's about achieving campaign goals. It's about engaging storylines. But anyway, I'm getting off the point. The question you were asking me is what has changed, right? And
and also just what surprised you the most?
Yeah, I think it does surprise me that about this sort of the pushback idea that you mentioned, because we're so familiar with all manner of technological innovations in advertising, virtual production, green screen work. Many of these things have radically changed the production environment. A lot of around advertising. Nobody's really sort of had too much to say about them, but AI seems to have pushed people's buttons in a slightly different way. But I think again, this is not the first time that this has played out in the technology world. We see this a lot when new ideas come along, and it takes a little while to sort of to settle and for people to understand them, and eventually they just sort of become part of the plumbing, and we get used to it. That is not to say that there are not some very profound ethical issues, especially with regards to the use of people's image rights, especially and celebrities in particular, their voices as well. So I'm not saying that it's anything goes. Far from it. I'm saying that I think some of the reaction, especially to some of the big brands putting work out there, is, in my view, and in view of many people, in fact, is a little bit OTT. I think some of those brands have actually been experimenting with other AI-led campaigns in other parts of the world that no one has said anything about. And in fact, I think it was the McDonald's ad that you mentioned a minute ago that was rescinded. Was it Coca-Cola? I can't remember which of the two it was.
I think it was the McDonald's one I think it was in Amsterdam. I'm not sure. I think it was that one that was rescinded, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think part of the issue with that was it just wasn't a very good ad. Rather than the fact that it was made with AI, I just think like it had a slightly downbeat message, and I think almost that's what people were reacting to, because there have been other AI campaigns that people have responded very positively to. But it's. I think the other thing is also this is not binary. It's not, it's fully Gen AI or it's not. What we see increasingly is a lot of hybrid workflows now, whereby people may be using AI, maybe even in the ideation phase, to rapidly prototype visuals, to experiment with things, or maybe they've got real actors involved, and maybe they're using it for sort of VFX or to create virtual backgrounds, in the same as they would have been doing with virtual production anyway. Yeah. But they're just using it to kind of speed up some of that work and to be able to produce more content.
Okay, that's great. I mean, so next I want to talk about sort of what agencies and brands are actually doing right now. I see you sort of touched on that. We've already spoken about a couple of campaigns, but forget the theory. What are agencies and brands actually doing with AI today in real workflows? Like what is happening in-house versus with partners, for example?
Well, that is an interesting topic in of itself, because a lot of brands obviously developing quite big in-house production teams. That's a trend that's been going on irrespective of anything that's happening with AI. But obviously, the fact that AI enables new types of workflows means that they can embrace some of these changing environments faster than may have been the case than if you needed to necessarily have traditional digital production facilities that obviously are much more expensive to engage. So I think there's two trends happening at once there. Sort of in-house you're asking me about, and then sort of AI production flows, and I think one enables the other to happen faster. Yeah. Having said that, I think what's really interesting is the fact that even the companies that sort of specialize in AI adverts are saying that that it's quite rare for them to have a fully 100% Gen AI workflow now. They will incorporate, especially if there's real physical products involved, because often the brand won't want those to be generated. So it depends on what it is, obviously, because there are issues regarding the authenticity and consistency of that product. So, for instance, they may want to include the product itself. Even subtle things like colorways can be not necessarily entirely consistent or accurate, especially if there's multiple flows going on. So they may want to include the real product, but maybe have like a lot of sort of virtualized environments around it, which they're using AI for. And so if you talk, and that's true if you talk to product teams or at the agency level. So if you hear sort of, you talk to some of the big agencies around how their flows are working, as I say, they may be using AI at the sort of ideation phase, but also for effects and to kind of, and just to kind of speed up processes. So I really don't think it's a question of one thing or the other. I think it's a question of a blend, and that blend will be be more or less appropriate for different teams depending on what their needs are and how that how they see their workflows operating.
That's really interesting. I totally agree. Just in terms of budgets, where do you think they're going? I mean, at the moment, are you finding it, from what you're hearing, is it tiny tests or meaningful spend?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily the best placed person to comment on that, but from what I understand, that I think it is we have moved well beyond the kind of tiny tests phase. I think if you look at some of the sort of language that's coming out of even big players like WPP and its emphasis on on AI in the last few months, it's clear that that they are way beyond the sandbox. Oh, let's just tweak a few things and see how it goes kind of stage. On the other hand, are especially sort of big clients ready to sort of fully throw their chips down on these new workflows? Perhaps not necessarily either. So one of the things that we were really keen to do with the Bionic Awards was to try and include people who are both within the AI bubble in terms of being top-class AI creators. And we have many of the the leading experts and best-known creators in the world who are judges. People like PJ Asaturo, who's had hundreds of millions of views for some of the AI-generated ads that he's done. Chris Branch, etc. I could name several, but but also alongside that to kind of put to have people who are from the traditional advertising industries. And so, for instance, we have the head of virtual production for Hogarth, WPP, and we also have one of the senior creative for the Coca-Cola company, Studio X in Madrid. So I don't know how familiar you are with Studio X. Is basically a production hub for Coca-Cola. It's a partnership between them and WPP. And Pedro Oliva is, one of the senior creatives there. So they are literally making the Coca-Cola ads for them, for the whole of Europe, in fact, everywhere outside of North America. So, we also have one of the top directors at Uncommon Creative Studio, which is one of London's most innovative advertising agencies, and they're not really using AI very much at all, although they are dabbling. So the question then becomes how they how these things sort of fit together, really. Sort of how do we how does that perspective work when you have two different worlds colliding in a way? So we wanted to have that sort of that I wouldn't call it sort of antagonism, but that kind of healthy debate,
healthy cross-border perspective.
Yeah, exactly. So for instance, Chris Branch, who was I think I mentioned a minute ago, he's one of the world's top AI producers. Now he makes AI adverts for Coca-Cola through his companies, Seedly. They are been making them for about over a year now. And so it's going to be fascinating to see what his perspective is on some of the real and spec AI ads that we get in, alongside people who I've already mentioned, who are doing the traditional workflows for WPP. So I'm really looking forward to that debate. To sort of and for creators, I think it's great for them to get that reality check from people who understand AI, they understand, and also from people who are at the very highest level of making advertising in traditional ways, so that you can see, okay, where do I sit? Where how good really is my work?
Yeah. Well, that's really, really insightful. Thank you for that. And what just another question here is, what are the best examples you've seen where AI genuinely helped? What stood out for you recently?
That is a good question. So you mean specifically with regards to advertising?
Just anything that's really, we spoke about some ads that didn't go down necessarily that well with the public, really. But from your perspective, have you seen anything that stood out that you're genuinely excited by?
I think I kind of agree with what you said before, which is that some of the most exciting work I have seen has been spec ads that weren't necessarily commissioned by a brand. So for instance, I'll give you two examples. One was one made for IKEA, not for IKEA, but it's a spec ad for IKEA, by Silverside AI, and which are they are one of the top AI production companies in the world. and they will actually be speaking at Bionic Awards as well, but they're not a judge. And they made one of their in-house creatives just did this really simple AI ad, which I'll send you the link to afterwards, where it was literally a box that kind of exploded and in an empty room, and out of it comes an entire room's worth of furnishings that just kind of settle, and then within seconds you go from a completely empty room to one that's completely furnished with IKEA products. And it's just really elegantly done, and really it doesn't sound like a very complicated idea, but many of the best ideas are the simple ones, right?
Experimentation is happening first. Excuse me. And when I've been speaking to a lot of AI creators, they're saying, in some instances they can map out or visualize ultimately an idea, 80% of the idea within a week. So, I'm saying, previs, for example, pre-visuals or storyboards, animatics. I mean, it's interesting with storyboards, they can pretty much visualize the film now. We're going past that in some ways, or animatics as well. But, where are you seeing the experimentation? When people are approaching you for the Bionic Awards, what are they talking about? Are they doing storyboards or animatics? Are they doing pitch films? Are they doing social content? Or are they doing finished broadcast work?
I think it's a little bit of all of those things. I think,
yes, I think so.
And in fact, that's one of the things that we did with the Bionic Awards was to try and make it as broad as possible. So it's not just a film festival, although obviously we do have a short films category, but we actually have 12 categories, which because maybe I should rewind a little to give you a bit of context as to sort of where this came about. Because that would help you understand why we've gone in the direction that we have. So
sure.
So I actually chaired London Tech Week last year, 2025, and what I noticed was that any of the sessions that we ran, which were on sort of AI and what it meant for creatives' careers, we had people like queuing out the building trying to get into, and I noticed very much that the people were split between those who were really super excited about it and those who were basically terrified that they were going to lose their jobs.
They're going to lose their job, absolutely.
And I resolved, I said to try and do something to help. So as I said on stage, I talked about this kind of what we call the doom versus boom continuum. And I said, look, maybe we all need to become a little bit more than human, like almost bionic. And then people were like, yeah, let's do something. That I had loads of people message me, get in touch, and they're like, tell me more about this bionic thing. And so I was like, right, I'm going to have to actually do something with this now. So I thought, well, rather than just sort of talking about it, I would try and do something really pragmatic. So we threw up a landing page saying, look, we might do this, like an awards thing for the Bionic project. What does everyone think? And we had hundreds of creators got in touch, and we spoke to a lot of them. And what was clear is that many of them felt that many of the existing awards programs that existed were either really expensive, or they were online only, or they were quite narrow, so mostly focused just on film. Which there wasn't enough emphasis on the things that will help people to progress their careers, things like advertising and many of the the other things that we talk about, and also the creators, people who have an on-screen presence, who are using it for some of special effects or world building and things like that. So we've bundled together all of that feedback, and that's what the premise of Bionic was really, which was to sort of, we have 12 categories that span advertising, including spec ads, but also things like digital artwork, so as in motion artwork, art installations, digital out of home, all of those types of projects, which are very poorly served by most advertising, most AI awards programs around the world. And then we have the more, what we call experimental bucket, which includes things like, as you would expect, best shorts, but also pilots as well. So, I think one of the most fascinating elements of AI is that, if you now have an idea that you want to, pitch to Netflix or to even put your own content out into the world, rather than just creating a book or a storyboard and some characterization ideas, you can actually make, a 5-10 minute version of your vision for a sort of gambling odyssey set in 24th century post-apocalyptic Oregon, and actually make it. And but the question then becomes, what do you do with that? How do you commercialize it? How do you turn that into something that you can pitch as a story idea, try and get it commissioned, or even exploit those rights yourself by distributing that content. And so people want to learn how to do those things, and that's part of what Bionic is about. So it's having categories where, yes, people can be spotlighted for the different types of work, but then crucially bringing them together in one environment where they can all learn from genuine industry experts as to sort of how these, so we have like the head of Gen AI from ITV, we have the head of film from the biggest law firm in the country that deals with rights and for TV and film. They did all the legal work around adolescents.
I know those guys, yeah, they're very good.
Ian Thompson. So yeah, Christos Michaels, he's the head of.
I know Christos well.
Oh, okay. So that's maybe so Christos is one of our judges, and he will be speaking on the film panel. So it's partly about celebrating imagination and talking about how we can make better work, whether it be advertising, film, or whatever, but also helping creatives to be able to kind of turn their creativity into a sort of an environment where they can actually make a living. And just finally, the third big bucket of categories we have is what's called craft. We're calling it craft, and that includes things like best use of sound, best use of music, and some of the influencer categories as well, like as most creative influencer and things like that. So it's a very broad, deliberately broad spread of different categories, with an aim of sort of bringing together what we call different tribes of people: the creators, the technologists, the agencies. The people, and bringing them all into one environment, one physical environment. We're going to get everybody together on March the 5th for the finals, and in Rich Mix in Shoreditch, and try and sort of learn from one another and help people to make connections, to be able to sort of find work, to be able to show the quality of what they've produced and produce something positive out of all of this.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think the genesis of the idea for doing the awards in the first place was your noticing of the interest in this, and also the, making a call and evolving and doing something new. And I think everyone's going to have to adopt and adapt to this new working environment, because it is going to have massive changes. And I think that's why you're having such extremes on both sides of doom and gloom, and then joy from lots of people who necessarily weren't able to be in the industry or not part of the industry, whether it's filmmaking or advertising, and the new people coming in because they've been given this opportunity because of AI. So it's a really interesting time. And I think everyone just needs to be wide-eyed and start moving and start evolving, basically, because otherwise you may get left out. I think it's pretty simple as that. Okay, so we've gone through, so resistance. I mean, you've kind of mentioned that before, but what is the real blocker? I mean, what is the main resistance right now, and what is it really about? Is it creative? Is it legal? Is it ego? Is it fear of job loss, quality concerns, brand safety?
I think, again, it's all of those things in different measures at different times. So for sure, I think that the quality issue has by the month, or in fact by the week almost, it becomes less of a thing, because certainly we have to bear in mind that this whole the whole genre of kind of AI filmmaking is barely a year old, really, in practical terms. So that's how new this all actually is. So if you look at the sort of the rate of change of quality of what we were looking at even this time, well, not even, I was going to say this time last year, but even in the summer, compared to what is doable now. And when I say doable, I don't mean necessarily doable by people who have sort of unlimited amounts of credit generations and big budgets and and super fast computers to be able to do all of this, but even sort of can be done at a relatively accessible level now. That the quality threshold is becoming less of a thing in an almost exponential fashion. So that brings us on to some of the other issues you talked about, which are sort of some of what we call guardrails, whether they be ethical concerns around some of the things we touched on earlier, in terms of not infringing on other people's rights, but also in terms of being able to protect your own intellectual rights. So if you have come up with some really interesting IP yourself, how do you ensure that when you put that out into the world that you're protecting that as well, especially if it has been generated in some form? So that's an issue too. But then obviously once we're talking in particular about engaging with brands, and obviously that brings with it a whole different set of guardrails, which I'm sure that many of your listeners will be familiar with, and that's why it's really important that that these conversations are had in a sort of constructive fashion, that we can sort of say, well, okay, here's a new toolbox, and that's all it really is. But how does that fit into the existing needs of our production environment? So that we can make sure we can produce things that are not going to infringe on the goals of what we're trying to achieve by in any of the ways that we've talked about. And again, I don't think it's necessarily an all or nothing thing. I think there will be certain environments where it's helpful, certain phases of workflows where it definitely helps, and there will be others where that's less the case.
Excellent. So from all the people you're speaking to now, because it's so interesting, because you've got such a wide, varied group, I'm imagining. When it comes to in a traditional sense, like how it changes the director and production company relationship, what does AI change in a director-producer relationship, for example? What becomes more valuable? I mean, I've got things here, for example, like taste or concepting, craft and leadership, speed and trust. But I'm imagining, well, I mean, what's your thoughts on that in terms of how are you seeing? It's just, as you said, it's only been a year, so this is all such early days. But from your experience, how does it change the director-producer relationship, for example? Does it enable, in one sense, the director just to do it themselves, or a producer even on another level to do it themselves?
So I think there's a few things in there. I think it's a bit of a misconception that AI production is just like one person sitting around in their pajamas and tapping out a few prompts over breakfast, and Shazam, you've got like some incredibly piece of work that's been just sort of miracled into existence. That is not really how it works. Of course, you can achieve an incredible amount if you with elegant prompting, but if you talk to people who are sort of actually making, whether it be ads or films, they are still working in teams and sometimes working in hybrid teams. But even the people who are working in a fully Gen AI environment. So if for instance, I mentioned him earlier, PJ Asaturo or PJ Ace, who is has just done a really clever ad for Qatar Airways, where they actually likes to do these kind of slightly crazy stunts whereby they sort of challenge themselves and his team to make the ad whilst on a flight. I saw
that whole thing. He did it on one flight. I saw that. It was very clever.
But you can see there that he's still got a team around him. So, you've still got people who are working on story, so maybe it's a smaller team than you might have had in the traditional environment. And obviously, you don't have as many sort of production needs in terms of, and even like quite obscure things. Like if you're making an advert, well, to take a classic example of the sort of the Sony's classic bouncing coloured balls where they tip them down the street. Was it San Francisco? I
think it was. Yes, it was San Francisco, because it had those specific San Francisco roads that the ones that
exactly. Very... So maybe you don't need $1 million bouncy balls, but even less obvious things. If you're making a McDonald's advert, like we talked about before, think of the hamburgers that get wasted, that are just sort of produced.
I've been on many of those shoots, and I'm always amazed at how much food gets wasted. All of any food category.
Yeah. So yes. So to come back to what we're saying, maybe your team will be smaller, and there will be savings in other places, and I'm sure that producers around the world who are looking at trying to make their budget stretch will be thinking, wow, we don't need real hamburgers, or not as many real hamburgers as maybe we might have needed before. So, there will be savings in some places and efficiencies in others. The real question, I think, though, comes back to what are the things that still really matter. So I think there still will be teams. The question is, there'll be different types of teams. Yeah. And you asked before, what are the things that will enable you to achieve success? And I think for me, the real word that leapt out there, it was taste. So we have to always remember that AI does not have taste, but you do. And so, yes, it can help you to bring a vision to life, and to, it can help you to amplify that vision. But I think people who think that they can just kind of ask the AI to sort of produce material from start to finish are sort of deluding themselves, that they think that they're going to produce something that is genuinely engaging, whether that be a film, an ad, piece of music, or anything else. You can amplify your taste much more efficiently, but I still believe, that the essence of the idea is and the discrimination to know which direction to move in, both as an individual and also as part of a creative team. Because, like we said before, big part of advertising is strategy and all of the thinking that goes into that, as much as it is sort of the sort of aesthetics. It will be those strands that enable people to succeed, and it will be the people who are either genuine tastemakers and or those who are able to sort of understand and embrace some of these newer elements of the production workflow, that are the ones that will thrive in the years ahead.
I love the way you're able to verbalize it so well, and I think exactly the same. We're completely on the same page with so many of these things. It's great. So just moving on to more versions for less money problem. I think it's pretty obvious, this stuff, but will clients start expecting more versions, more volume, more localization, more deliverables without paying for more? From my perspective, it's obvious that of course they will. Just in terms of this, it's like, it's different. I've been trying to work this out myself by speaking to people. Like, how do you price and protect value in this environment? How do producers avoid being squeezed, and what needs to change in scoping and expectation setting? What are clients being unrealistic about already?
Well, I think clients have always been unrealistic.
Yes.
So nothing's changed there. You can go back as far as you like, and that will always be the case, and it will always remain the case. And that ultimately is the producer's job, is to kind of sort of find that sort of sweet spot where the business makes sense for everybody. But I think it becomes harder when the pace of change is so fast. So where things that I think what's really interesting when you talk to people who are making ads is it's sometimes the little things that clients think are easy to fix that are not. So someone was making
Yes.
an advert that involved a squirrel, I think, eating, and he said,
and the hair on the squirrel, the fur.
Yeah, they said the client was like, "Oh, this would be great if the squirrel could just do something, could just make it jump backwards or behave slightly differently." And they were like, that sounds like a really simple thing to do, but it took them a lot of work to try and get it to sort of, to behave in exactly the way that they wanted in the first instance. It's almost like trying to sort of, direct a squirrel with real cameras. Like, can you just make it jump a little bit higher in the air on one specific shot when it's taken you all day in the rain to get that shot in the first place? So it's those kind of like, things that are maybe less obvious, more so than, can we have this in 50 different languages or, 20 different city locations around the world? Actually, some of that stuff is not as hard to achieve as you might think with some of the, the newer workflows. But so it's what I'm getting at is, some of the things that clients expect are less obvious in the new world. It will take a period of time for that adjustment to happen. But there's another way of looking at it as well, which is that, yes, clients will be expecting more, but also teams can deliver more. So if you are able to deliver, multiple versions all over the world, and it's not costing you anything like as much as it would have done 2-3 years ago to do that, then you're going to make a lot more money if you become more efficient and more able to do these things. So there is big incentive for producers to lean into some of these ideas. Not necessarily all of them for the reasons I've outlined, but there are huge efficiencies to be made, and that does not necessarily mean that you can ice 70-80% of your team. It means that maybe you can use that team to achieve more and to take on more clients, more work, and do more things, because there's always more to do, right?
Well, if you've got more effective communication, just by what you're saying, if you can hit more people and it's effective, then absolutely, it's a much better business model, isn't it? Ultimately, I hesitate to say that in case you'll get a lot of pushback on that, but I think ultimately there is that, and I think ultimately people are going to pay for, it hasn't got taste yet in these AI models, and you get what you pay for. I think there's still going to be that, especially in the creative space, because that's always, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Okay, so moving on, what does good look like at the moment, especially in advertising? What does look good right now? Not just pretty, but effective. What are the markers of equality, sort of what makes something feel authored rather than generated? And where does the craft live now? Is it lighting, movement, pacing, edit sound? What have you seen in that area? What have you seen that stuck out? And what are you noticing? Or is it really, it's a test of the tech, it's a test of the technology as well. Because as you said, it's only been around a year, it's moving so fast, and suddenly, the lighting is better now, and suddenly these bits that weren't so good have improved. Or is it a bit of both, as always, with human and sort of AI interaction?
Interesting question. So I think, I don't want to keep hedging my bets, but I think it is a little bit of all of those things. I think craft, all of those elements of craft make a difference. But I think the one that really sticks out to me is to understand that narrative and storytelling, really. So I think as it becomes simpler to achieve some of these more technical elements, lighting, etc., in a sort of virtualized environment, and I know that there's lighting engineers around the world, ready to throw something at the screen as I say that. Fully aware of that. I think that it will be the storytelling elements, and that includes the editing and pacing and all those things as well that really matter. And so, what I often say to sort of creators who are sort of making stuff that looks incredible is to say, look, go and watch a lot of adverts, especially the older ones, the really good ones, and try to understand what made them great in the first place. And it's not always the sort of some of them had quite ropey sort of cinematography around them, but it was the nature of what they were saying, why they and the humanity that comes through them that made them great. And I think that as it becomes quite easy to sort of produce quite glitzy looking things, there's a temptation to kind of move towards the shiny toy without sort of really thinking about the fundamentals that underpin it and what in the first instance. And I think that's the where you can probably add the most value, not by being able the person who can necessarily produce something that looks really whizzy in a really easily achieved fashion and being fast, although obviously those things help. But if you're a person who can contribute genuine value by being able to say, look, I've got this great idea, or why don't we tell the story in this way, or even as an editor being able to sort of say to talk about those things, or in a from that in that sort of post-production environment world, these are the things I think where you can really still make a big contribution, and they're the things that people are overlooking.
That's a fantastic observation. It's a really, really good insight, and I think it's so easy to be overwhelmed by the technology because it's new. It's all new, and every day, like you said before, there's a new revelation, and everyone's sitting there going, "Oh my God, no wonder there's so much fear and uncertainty." But the facts of the matter is that it doesn't matter what you do, it's got to be the bones of it, the basis of it, the narrative, the casting, for example, the visualizations of these things, the character development. It's got to be relevant, otherwise, it just doesn't land. Doesn't matter how good the tech is. It's like it's like in a way what I found in movies in the last 10 years, with the marvelization of movies. There's all this technology, there's all this sort of overwhelm of what's going on, and they've sort of lost sight, it feels in a way, of the story of the characters themselves, the stories. They sort of relying too much on the big spectacle, as it were, and it's sort of lost its way. And I think the same is at the moment. That's really useful. I think that will calm a lot of nerves as well, or maybe not. But anyway, so generic AI content versus great work. Just a little bit about this, really. Sort of, I think you've sort of already mentioned it, but what separates the great stuff from the generic AI sludge? And I hesitate to use AI sludge as a word, or whatever they're calling it now, because I was picked up on it by a friend recently, and he was absolutely right, just saying, look, it's so new at the moment. It's impossible for anyone to be ridiculing or being disparaging about what's being made, because people are experimenting at the moment. It's such a new time. And he also mentioned, which was interesting, maybe they have, because I've seen a lot of good stuff, but maybe the auteurs, as he was saying, haven't turned up yet, which is something else I thought was interesting. But for you, what separates the great stuff from the generic AI sludge out there?
Well, I mean, I guess it's such a wide spectrum that you're talking about there. I think that in terms of adoption, you're right that it'll maybe be at the sort of lower end of the advertising world in particular, where we're starting to see people who care less about sort of some of the sort of guardrails that I've talked about, who are just willing to sort of put stuff out there, irrespective of its quality or of its that is a challenge, and frankly, it gives the whole industry, the whole advertising industry, never mind the whole AI advertising industry, a bad name. The same is true of all different types of content, especially even if it's just social content as well. So what I think separates it is consideration. It's basically the same sort of ideas that we've been sort of talking about. It's about creators who just take a moment to think about what they're trying to do, why they're trying to do it, and to just add a little bit of polish. I definitely believe, we talked about auteurs. I think that many of some truly great filmmakers have not actually released as much work yet, because they've been sort of perfecting it and quietly. Some of them have released shorts into festivals like Bionic Awards around the world. Others have not, and I think that people are going to be quite surprised by what 2026 brings in terms of the quality. I mean, even looking at the entrants that we have in Bionic Awards now. So my co-founder Andy, he won Clermont-Ferrand, top film festival in the world, not AI film festival, but the top film festival in the world as a filmmaker. And he was saying to me that many of the entries we've already had in the short films category would be worthy finalists there, in his view. He wouldn't even know that they were made with AI, many of them, not all of them, but many of them. And this is 26 is just starting. Many of these films were made several weeks or months ago. So I think things are going to, people think that things have been changing fast, but believe me, you haven't seen anything yet. It's exciting times to be.
I was just about to say it's really exciting times. It really is. It really is. Okay, so now you've obviously gone into it before, and you've mentioned it throughout. And why we're talking ultimately is because of these Bionic Awards that you've set up. So here's the whole spiel about it. It's like, what is it and why it matters? And also, what are you trying to reward?
So what it's we don't see it so much as a question of reward as so much as a question of support. I mean, as I say, my goal with Bionic Awards in the first instance was to help support creatives in changing times. And so we have new creators and new creatives who are looking to sort of either enter the industry or to maybe migrate from one type of work to another. And then we have people who are maybe working in the creative industry in an established role, who are worried about what the impact of AI might be on their jobs. So it's about helping all different types of creative professionals to sort of to give them the visibility, the skills, and the connections that they need to be able to keep working and to be able to support their families ultimately. And that's why we're doing this. That's why we've made the entry fee is ridiculously low. It's just £20 to enter, and also every third entry is free. So if you want to enter more than one of the 12 categories, you put 2 in. The third is free, which is nothing.
Pretty amazing, because that's fantastic, especially it's just unheard of for most awards. They're just so expensive.
And that's what we wanted to get away from. And then rather than it being some black tie dinner at a fancy hotel that you then have to pay hundreds of pounds to go and to attend if you're lucky enough to be shortlisted, all of the people who are shortlisted, or all of the people who are, make the finals, as in, will be invited free to come to what we're calling the Creative Summit, which is at Rich Mix Cinema in Shoreditch on March the 5th. And, the other crucial point is that many of these people who are finalists will also be speaking on stage. So we think that too often the creators and the talent themselves are kind of almost like the backdrop for these events. And so we will be putting them on stage to do show and tell, where they will play their work. They will discuss it with the audience. I'm hosting it, so we will do Q&A with them as well, and try and put them out there into the world, so where they can hopefully pick up more work. So if they've made a great spec ad, there will be very senior people from the advertising industry in the audience who might want to be able to find some of this talent. So we're trying to sort of bring these different types of people together, and to give them, as I say, the visibility, platform, and connections to succeed. So if people want to learn more about it, bionicawards.com is the place where you can sort of see all of the different categories, or you can follow us on Insta, which is the Bionic Awards is our Instagram handle. And also we've just taken on Adobe as a headline sponsor, and they are giving all of the winners a year's free subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud, which I know has become quite expensive in recent years, especially for creators who are starting out in the industry. So this is a fantastic way for them to be able to sort of, if you win any of the 12 categories, you get it free for a year.
And it's also, having a brand like Adobe on board just shows the significance of the awards. You've done amazingly well.
Absolutely. I mean, I have to say, props to Adobe, because they really get what we're trying to do, especially the fact that we're trying to do it in a very ethical way. So we want to have these conversations about guardrails. We want to bring people together to sort of have grown-up adult conversations about what is possible and what is advisable, which are not necessarily always the same thing. So yeah, exactly. We want to get everybody into this room. We want to look at fantastic work, yes, but we want to also talk about how you can sort of do that in a kind of in a commercial environment, whether it be for a film or an ad or any other type of content. But we also want to make it really accessible as well, and that means partly, having very, very low fees, and a very even the Creative Summit the finals will be in the evening, but throughout the day there'll be a whole day of talks and panels and these kind of spotlighting sessions that I'm talking about, so people can come for the afternoon. They can learn a lot about the industry, and that will be really affordable as well. And we're just trying to make it as open and friendly as possible for all different types of people from different parts of the industry to try and come, be part of the Bionic family, and ultimately to be able to kind of, move forward with their career.
It sounds amazing, and I'm definitely coming. I'm going to go and buy my ticket now. Just final closing bits, really. There's just two more sections. It's relatively brief, but just practical advice for producers and creatives now. So if you're a producer, creative director, what should you do this month to stay ahead without turning it into a gimmick? What tools are actually worth learning? What should people ignore? If it was you, from your perspective, with all the stuff you've learned, I know it's only 12 months, but with all these observations, how should people build taste and judgment? What would you suggest? Are there forums out there for people to look at? Is it worth, for example, adopting like Kling or going on one of these AI platforms and testing stuff out? I mean, you can do it on ChatGPT, where they've got their DALL-E version. But what would you suggest if someone wants to get involved, or just to see how the industry is, or is developing?
So I would look a little. I wouldn't worry so much about specific tools and platforms. I would look to, the same way as we said before that AI creators should maybe look at sort of traditional films and traditional adverts. I would say the same is true the other way around as well. So like look at sort of best examples of AI work, and some of the creators themselves do fantastic educational material around this. So two of our judges, I've already mentioned PJ Ace a couple of times, but he does guided walkthroughs of exactly how he makes his adverts, which tools he uses, how he does it. And the same is true of another one of our top creator judges, Chris First, who runs the one of the top, one of the biggest platforms for AI creatives on X, like 250,000 people on there. Another good one to mention is another judge who I've mentioned already, Chris Branch. He has a community called Creative Eyes, where they do a sort of a weekly show on a live stream on LinkedIn, where they sort of play some of the best material released that week and talk through it. But more than anything, I mean, what I'm going to say is, come to the Bionic Awards, because there not only will you see the genuinely world-class work in all of these different categories and hear some incredible conversations, but you will be part of this new community. You can sign up for our newsletter. I forget to mention that the closing date is January the 25th. So you still have about 10 days to be able to sort of enter the awards if you've got a project. And the bar doesn't necessarily have to be an amazing advert. We have more casual categories as well. Best viral moment, which could be literally anything under a minute long. So if you've been tinkering with something and you think it's fun, whether it be a spec ad or just something that you put on socials, that put it in there. And if it's great, you'll be on stage and you'll be celebrated. But so there's lots of different access points. I think some of our judges already are building these communities. We are creating our own too, obviously, but we're just getting going with that. And we just hope to see as many of you guys as possible on March the 5th. It's going to be really fascinating and a lot of fun.
Amazing. And finally, some quick fire. So just one answer questions, really. One answer feedback, really. One AI tool you actually rate?
Ooh, well, I
sounds like it's impossible for you to do that. But if gun to the head, what would you say?
I think they all have strengths in different ways. I mean, you would, and it's not a cop out, because obviously, you would expect me to mention Adobe here, which I think is true. But I think
I wouldn't actually. To be fair, I thought they just sponsor the Bionic Awards, and you're more,
Yeah, we are genuinely independent, so we're not. And that's what I was going to say. So yes, Adobe are our headline sponsor. So you would expect me to mention them, but I think that they would be the first to acknowledge as well that that there are. I mean, even on the Adobe platform, you can use lots of different models through their Firefly platform. So if you want to use Google VO, or if you want to use, Kling or any of these others, you can do it all from there. And that is true of other platforms as well. And I suppose what I would say is that I would encourage, that's why I'm suggesting that you watch the walkthroughs made by expert creators. Because yes, it's great to dabble, but they will show you which tools they use. And actually, they're not using usually just one tool. They're using different models that are good for different things. And it's helpful for you to understand what those strengths and weaknesses are by watching what they do, seeing how they made it, and then because also the tool that may be right for you will depend on what type of material that you're making and why. So one model may be excellent for a specific type of work, but maybe not so much for another. So I think it's not really my place to say, oh, you must have this tool or that.
Okay. And one thing people are overhyping at the moment.
Oh, in what context do you mean that?
Well, just in the context of, let's say, generative AI.
Well, I think it's just generally true that I think people are prone to hyperbole, about the industry. And I think, anyone who says to you, "Oh, it's over for whatever," it is, how many times do you see that a week? Yes, things are moving at pace. Yes, there are exciting developments around, but I think that that it's not going to be the sort of silver bullet that people necessarily imagine, for all of the reasons we've talked about it's so I think I would be wary of hype in general, and to sort of try and take a sort of a positive but neutral approach to it all, where you think there are some really exciting things happening, and but there is also an incredible amount of talent in all of these different industries already that we don't want to lose those people. We just want to help them evolve and to find a brighter future for them and their families. And these tools help us to do that. And it's just about having these grown-up conversations around how that happens.
Okay, great. Well, listen, Alex, this has been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it. Where should people find just finally, where should people find Bionic, and what is the deadline again? Just to remind everyone.
So the final deadline for entries for Bionic Awards is the 25th of January. The website is bionicawards.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at the Bionic Awards. It's the Instagram tag. And by all means, sign up for our, even if you're not looking to enter the awards, you can sign up for our newsletter at the website, and we will keep you up to date as to what's happening with the event, which I say is on March the 5th, and you'll be able to get tickets there as well. And it's just really thankful to you for having me on today, and to be able to speak to your community, and to try and bring people together and create a more positive future.
My pleasure. And that was our bits with Alex Pell. If you're enjoying these, share it with someone in production. It helps more than anything. And again, if you've got any bids for 2.0 films, give me a call. We service productions in Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Northern Italy, and Austria. Fast turnarounds, top tier crews, and stunning locations. Thanks very much.